weapons of terror in the case of Syria. How, their chemical weapons attacks have been just like, how can we get, we have to kill this Israeli. We're going to say, we'll do anything we can. And so it's a weapon of terror attack. Nobody would be affected. Like I said, somebody might find some cards out there. There's probably, that will allow somebody to have an app in the WMD range. It's, the value of that app is going to be very low compared to the other graphs that are out there, I think. I'm just going to show a little literature. The app that's going to be like, the United States should stop us from these things is probably going to be 100% correct. The card's going to be really good if it exists. But it's just not something we do, or at least not official, right? They are definitely not included in any of our DCS and FMS programs right now. Other questions about weapon systems, man-pads, all those other categories? All right. So I kind of thought the best way to explain how to approach the top. Oh, before we do that, the last thing, the topic mechanisms. This was something, when I wrote my version of the paper, I just said call it arms transfers, don't do anything else. This topic has two limits on it, and they have to be weapons that are transferred either under direct commercial sales or the foreign military sales programs. These are very specific kind of export controls. There's a distinction between them. Direct commercial sales means Boeing gets to sell the weapon to Saudi Arabia. Direct from the company. Comes off the manufacturing line, gets shipped over. Foreign military sales is the US government provides the weapon to the other country. The distinction is a lot of foreign military sales are old US weapons. We're about to retire this old landing craft. 50s era landing ship that's designed to dump troops off onto the shore. We've got newer versions of it. We've upgraded a lot of ours recently. We needed to, but it's still good. It still works. It just doesn't work for us right now. Anybody want? Russia does this a lot too, right? A lot of their weapon sales have been old Soviet stocks that they just couldn't afford to keep anymore, especially the submarines. Right? Those things are expensive. And so they dumped a lot of those in there. Direct commercial sales and foreign military sales both require licensing and approval by Congress. Right? There is a process by which there is approval that is given. Most of it is rubber stamped. Right? There are exceptions to it. Right? This week the Senate voted not to allow a multi-billion-dollar arms sale to Saudi Arabia because of their role in the war of Yemen. Right? You all learn a lot about Saudi Arabia. A lot of them give them guns. Because they're kind of jerks. It's a rare move. Usually Congress rubber stamps a lot of these, but this was a time where they stood up. The Saudi regime has been getting away with a lot of crazy stuff lately, and people want to bring them in. Both categories are available for foreign military financing, FMF, which is where the United States provides financial guarantees to make the transfer happen. A lot of times, FMF consists of non-repayable loans, which functionally makes the transfer paid. Right? We just give them the weapons through foreign military financing. Or we'll set favorable terms so they can afford a weapon system. The FMS F list is pretty short, though. There's only about 10 countries that are able to get weapons under FMF financing rules. Israel, Egypt, right? Because 78 peace accords. Jordan, a Middle East ally. Who else is on? Oh, Morocco. We'll talk about them in a little bit too. North Africa, probably our biggest export. We send more weapons to any outside of Egypt. Morocco buys the most weapons from the United States in Africa. Turkey and Greece are NATO allies. And so we have, but they're poor. Same with Portugal, right? They don't have a lot of money. These are like the worst economies of the European Union, except Turkey's not in the European Union. And so they can have modern weapon systems as part of NATO. The United States provides a lot of FMF funding for them. Yemen, back when we used to provide them with arms, has also fallen, and Tunisia is obviously another one. And these things vary in terms of what states like. Some countries like foreign military sales. They think it looks good. They think it's like the United States coming out and being like, we are directly supporting you. There's a symbolic action that occurs there that buying directly from the company doesn't have the same feel, right? It's not that same allyship, the same signal. And so some countries prefer that. Sometimes some of these sales are both. A great example of this is that under the Foreign Military Sales Program and FMF financing, the United States ships to Israel a bunch of Apache Longbow helicopters, right, which is the main kind of assault helicopter that the United States uses. It serves a number of different roles. But within that, Israel also, as a direct commercial sale, paid Boeing a bunch of money to come over and do upgrades to the helicopters that the U.S. government functionally gave them. Right? They basically went back to Boeing and said, can we get that new system installed here? And Boeing went in, put new radars and new targeting systems and like all the kind of software. The advanced weapons, it's like buying a car now. It's like, here's all of these options that you can add to it. Oh, you want the fancy stereo that you can plug your phone into? Costs you a little bit more. You want all these different things. And so a lot of the major manufacturers of advanced weapon systems have all sorts of customizations, all sorts of ways that they can tailor the product for the countries in order of doing it. So even the major jets, right, especially, there's so many variants of them that it all depends on the needs of that country. Oh, you need one that can take off and land from an aircraft carrier? That's a whole different system than the one that just takes off normal, right? These programs work together. Now, the reason why these are in the top isn't just to make you all research the arcane kind of approval process of global arms. It's to limit out covert transfers. Because of these limiters, acts like stop giving weapons to Syrian rebels probably aren't common. Because we do not give those weapons through these programs. We usually give them covertly. We let the CIA get them over there somehow. And so they're not transparent. These are all transparent. All of these are publicly reported. That's how SIPRI has all that data. Right? It's easy to acquire. In most states, for major conventional weapons, they announce it. They make the terms of the contracts very apparent. In terms of major conventional weapons, there's very little secret aid. It's too easy to track. Right? It's why don't people trade in weapons of mass destruction? Because everybody's looking for it. And when we get any hint that something might be happening, there's telltale signs of all of it, so people know how to look for it. And so the weapon systems are easy to track, and it's programs like this that make that possible. But most countries report this stuff. So these are in the topic mostly to eliminate the covert apps, but also to create some process around that we'll talk about later. This is a process. This is a government entity. That these create very specific limits. Because the munitions list, it's like when we talk about arms, most of it most people die at the hands of assault rifles and submachine guns and stuff like that. Well, what about like knives? Right? Knives are weapons. They're really not categorized as this though. The Rwandan genocide was carried out not with guns but machetes. They're free to import them. There's no restrictions on those because they have a very specific use. Some like attachments, bladed attachments to weapons will count. The new smart missiles that the United States have that don't explode but just shoot a bunch of blades out, because we realized that we were killing too many people collaboratively with drone strikes. Will fall under this because the rest of the system is there. But it is that. But these exist to create those limits in the topic and create some process. All right. Apps by genre. Look, there's basically these apps that are going to be available. Every app that you hear is going to be one of these three categories or some permutation thereof. Right? Some combination. It's either going to be stop selling to country X. Very country-specific apps. These are going to be the most common type of app because they're the ones that best fit the literature. They're the ones that most folks, when they talk about arms transfer, this is what they write. This is what the policy wonks write about. We want to talk about what it means to arm Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Egypt, and Taiwan, right? We want to talk about what those things are. The next thing you'll hear are weapon-specific apps, right? Stop selling X weapon for whatever reason. Now, I'm going to give you all a lot of different examples of how that might play out in terms of this. Then there's going to be some process apps, right? Direct commercial sales and foreign military sales being in the resolution means people might just tweak that process in a way that reduces the number of weapons that get sold abroad, which we find it's going to be like pulling teeth to research it. And then any permutation. The most common permutation is going to be stop selling weapon X to country Y. Right? So don't give this country this weapon. And I'll give you all different examples of that, or at least what I think are going to be the better versions of that. The ones that have actually appeared in debates before. All right, so we'll start by the countries. This is where the topic gets big. The main problem with this topic that everybody kind of agrees upon is that there's no unified negative ground because all of the regions that, since we sell to everybody, the politics of arms sales are so different between different countries, right? And so if I want to spend my summer and I want to research China, and I want to be able to say we have to contain China, we must arm our allies to the teeth because China is aggressive and they're coming to get us, that argument's not going to be very good against somebody who's like, cut off Colombia. The weapons we're selling Colombia, none of them to China. Or even Europe, for that matter. Right? And so you have to think a bit about this topic region. And these are the different regions that will all have their own unique rank. Right? East and Southeast Asia is one area. South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. The Middle East, Africa, Europe, Latin America. These are the major divides. In all honesty, by the time the school year starts, if you are, I want to go for a disad in every 2NR type of debater, you are going to need a disad for each of the regions. That's a lot, right? Usually on the topic you get one good generic disad. But we haven't had a good politics DA in probably since the second Obama term, right? When the Republicans became obstructionists and nothing would pass. There's no good politics DA under Trump, especially now that the House won't do anything. The House is controlled by the Democrats. There's very few things that are ever going to be able to get passed through. People are going to write politics DAs. Don't get me wrong. The cards are always out. They're just not as good as they used to be. The election's coming up, so we'll have an elections DA. But even then, the links to some of those vary from region to region as well. And so we're really missing that. So let's talk about the different regions and the types of apps that you might see. East and Southeast Asia. This is the China part of the topic, right? We are arming these countries in order to deter China and North Korea, in the case of Japan and South Korea. But Taiwan especially, we are arming them because China wants Taiwan back as its country. We do not recognize Taiwan as its own country. Nobody does. It's a little hush-hush. It is the worst open source secret of the world that they, but we provide them with lots of weapons. And we provide them with advanced weapons, a high-end manufacturing. Same with Japan. Japan's a major ally. The U.S.-Japan alliance is the cornerstone of our strategy in East Asia. Our relationship with them is, is very unique compared to other countries. And so there's going to be a number of apps that are going to ask to reduce the sales of weapons from Japan. Now, those apps are probably going to be, for Taiwan, there's going to be both don't sell Taiwan very specific weapon systems. Those are probably going to be the better Taiwan apps than generally decrease support for Taiwan. Because the types of weapons that we sell to Taiwan are usually contingent on how NAV is selling this to Taiwan made China. Right? And it's the same for Japan and South Korea. Can we give them this weapon, and how mad is China going to get about that? The number one thing that's going to make China mad is when we try to give these countries missile defense. Because China thinks that's us protecting ourselves from their nuclear weapons so we can first strike them with ours. It's why missile defense is kind of considered by some to be destabilizing. Others think it's awesome. Right? There's a debate to be had there. But from the Chinese perspective, us providing advanced missile defense to those three countries is a direct threat to their ability to carry out a second strike, to retaliate against a potential nuclear strike against them. So we don't sell weapons of mass destruction, we just sell things around them. And the more advanced our missile defense systems get, the more nervous it makes China. For South Korea and Japan, the concern is that we will give them the latest generation of the THAAD system, T-H-A-A-D. It's like terminal, high altitude, something defense. And it's designed to shoot missiles out of the air, right? And the newest versions of it have advanced radar that can see for miles within the Chinese territory. And they are very much concerned. Now, we are trying to give them to South Korea and Japan because of North Korea. And we keep telling Chinese, no, look, this ain't about you. But we end up giving them the more advanced system because they want the best, right? If you have somebody who has all those ballistic missiles that North Korea has pointed at you, you want the best defense that's available to you. In terms of Taiwan, the weapons that the missile defense system that the Chinese are most concerned about are the Aegis cruisers, which is a naval missile defense boat. Right? It is a very specific naval platform that we have, and we have sold to Taiwan. Right? We've already sold these, and they're always asking for more. Other aspects of Taiwan, one of the apps that you'll see is that we need to stop exporting F-16s. And variants of the F-16 to them, advanced fighter jets, because the offensive-defensive line gets blurred. We're not sure if this is an air combat ship or a fighter bomber and how it's going to be used. And it might allow them to attack China. Right? And that makes the Chinese nervous. The other list here, it's just easier to categorize, is the ASEAN states. What's ASEAN? And it's ASEAN, not ASEAN. Australia. Singapore's down. Where's Singapore located?
Next to Malaysia.
What do you think these two letters stand for?
Southeast Asia.
Yeah, Southeast Asia. The 10 countries that kind of create that corner of the Asian map, right? Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, Philippines. This was my senior year of college. It was decreased security assistance to those countries. And all 10 was Thailand, Malaysia. We provide arms to all of them. They buy a lot of Russian arms and Chinese arms too. We provide them with a lot of systems, though, for the sole purpose of allowing them to stand up to China in the South China Seas. And so some of the different platforms that we might give them are going to be there. There's also going to be some apps from the ASEAN states. Like there's a pretty big push right now to cut off aid to the Philippines because their current prime minister, Duarte, is, lack of a better term, an asshole. Who has said things like, we will just kill drug dealers, right? And has provoked violence, has been aggressive in a number of different ways. It's more authoritarian in meaning, and there's a lot of people who are saying we need to start cutting them off. in order to get some leverage over their behavior. There's going to, but most of these apps, though, from outside the Philippines, and there might be some counterterrorism apps within Southeast Asia. Most of those apps, though, are going to be about not providing them weapons that are going to anger China, because China wants to make claims to the South China Sea that a lot of the ASEAN states have claims to as well. Right? Philippines, Vietnam are the ones that have the most prominent claims because they were right against it. But some of the other states as well claim. Those are the areas. But this is where the app is going to be centered around. We are angering China by doing this. It is destabilizing for us to send these things. Taiwan especially. The Georgetown campus already put out their kind of starter packet, and their big app was stop giving Taiwan F-16s that are destabilizing, and also a certain class of diesel submarines, right, that they're able to acquire. That are also kind of destabilizing and don't really help stop China either. One of the tricks of that app is that the 1AC is designed to beat the "but then China will just invade them" argument by saying all the weapons that we are giving them fail at deterrence. Right? One of the things that you should think about when you're writing your app is, well, are these weapons actually good for deterrence? And so that's one of the things. And that's going to be, some of the Japan apps are going to be like, don't give them not only the missile defense stuff, but there might be like, don't give them this particular jet or this particular naval platform. Why? It's not a very good one. We're just kind of forcing it on them. It's going to make China mad that they get it, and won't do anything at the end of the day to help them against the folks that are doing it. So that's the China part of this topic, right? The main advantages are going to be centered around that. The main disadvantage is going to be whether or not they help contain China or not, and how that debate goes on. South Asia. South Asia, for the most part, is going to consist of these three countries. There might be somebody who talks about Bangladesh, doubtful. Just not a major arms importer. When they do, they tend not to buy from the United States only because they don't really need a lot of weapons. Their need for weapons is very limited. But India is a top importer, right? And they buy from everybody. Right? And the U.S. has courted the Indian market for years. Because for years they were buying from the Russians because the Russians were just cheaper, but they would occasionally buy U.S. systems. And so over the years, we've given India more and more military aid, and it's had a number of political effects. This is one of the easy kind of formulas of debate. The relationship between the United States, India, and Pakistan is usually considered to be zero-sum, which simply means if we are friendly with India, the friendlier we get with India, the meaner we get with Pakistan, or the more upset Pakistan gets. Or the nicer we are in Pakistan, the angrier India gets about it. Right? So your disad to any one of these is usually if it involves the other country. Right? So if we're going to decrease arms sales to Pakistan, that's going to make India really happy. Right? Because they're rivals. They fight wars against each other. They have territorial claims that are disputed. Pakistan loves to fund terror groups that will spill across the border and attack Indian troops. And right? But they've been doing this for so long, and they're both nuclear armed. So you get real quick to the big impacts of debate. And we provide both of them tons of weapons. Pakistan, we give all sorts of military aid to them, and have for years. In fact, in the 90s, there was a U.S. law on the books. It's called the Press Law Amendment, that said every year the President of the United States had to certify that Pakistan was not pursuing a nuclear weapon. Right? They did not have a nuclear weapons development program. And until that certification happened, we were not allowed to give weapons to Pakistan. Easy enough. The entire time Pakistan was developing nuclear weapons, the entire time we knew about it. We had all of the intel on it. Everybody knew about it. But now the President said they're in compliance. They sent all sorts of weapons to Pakistan, including nuclear-capable aircraft. Right? Pakistan's nuclear capabilities are mostly gravity bombs that they're going to strap to the bottom of American-made F-16s. In fact, in 1989, there was a tiff between India and Pakistan in which US intelligence assets have photos of them loading the bombs onto Pakistani F-16s out in the open. Right? Not in some secret hangar, but very clearly out in the open because they wanted the United States to see it. They knew that they were being watched. And to show their resolve in a conflict that was going on, they started loading the weapons. Right? It's the closest we've probably come to nuclear war in the past 20 years. And so the United States immediately intervenes, right? Sends in a bunch of diplomats and a bunch of other folks to calm the situation down. It was all, again, over disputes in the Kashmir, territorial dispute, one of the most common sources of conflict in international relations, and got everybody to calm down about it. But it took that level of signal. Nowadays, we give Pakistan and Afghanistan tons of military aid to fight the war on terror. And there's a bunch of folks who say we should decrease that aid because it's not only ineffective, but it's empowering some of the worst parts of Pakistani politics. Right? It encourages them, it basically encourages them to do all the bad stuff and rewards them for it. And so they continue to support terror groups that attack India. It continues to give the military an outsized source of power within Pakistan and undermine the chances of democracy flourishing there. It continues, it's just like all the worst things that Pakistan has done over the years, it just encourages it. So there's good apps to be written about why we should cut off Pakistan in these various categories. And some of them are across the board. It's not the permutation of System X countrywide. Afghanistan is mostly anti-terror aid, right? Ever since we toppled their government and the Taliban, who's in power, didn't like being kicked out of power. They keep fighting back. And so we've poured so much money in terms of weapons. The terms blood and treasure, right? Remember, American soldiers have died there, fighting this ongoing insurgency that has been going on since we originally funded it in the 1980s. There's a push that says perhaps we need to de-escalate this conflict. Part of that means we need to take the weapons away from the Afghanis and stop giving them more advanced weapons or more aid. Because not only are they not effective at using it, a lot of those weapons end up in the hands of the Taliban and other terror organizations within the region. So there's a number of apps here. Now, the India apps aren't going to be as prolific. The literature just isn't as strong as it is for places like Taiwan or Saudi Arabia as to why we need to decrease our assistance to India. It's mostly going to be rooted in this kind of this politics of South Asia. There is a China component as well. India and China are major rivals. They have fought wars against each other. They have territorial disputes in the Himalayas, near the Kashmir line as well. Right? That's a disputed area where all three, Pakistan, India, and China kind of intersect. Everybody has a different territorial claim. China fears India, India fears China. They bump up against each other. So that's one of the few places where the two regions overlap. So there are some South Asian apps out there, not as good as the East Asian apps when it comes to the China question. Is there own? The big area is going to be the Middle East, right? If Taiwan is a big app, it is one of the big apps. Saudi Arabia is the biggest. They are the biggest buyer. And the ones that have the best evidence written about them for the Afghan. Our arms sales to Saudi Arabia has fueled their intervention into Yemen, which has become a humanitarian nightmare. They are dropping U.S. guided munitions in all sorts of different places. One of the big concerns has been the use of cluster bombs. Cluster bombs are just one bomb that drops a ton of mini bombs out there. They're designed to take out large formations of people. They don't do very well against anything with armor. But we've given those to Saudi Arabia and have given them the license to manufacture a number of these ordinances themselves. And a lot of folks are saying now is the time to rein them in. When the Senate voted to stop an arms sales to Saudi Arabia recently, that's a big deal. And the literature for Saudi Arabia right now is probably some of the best AF literature out there at this time. You know, if you want to debate what is the heart of the topic, it's going to be the Saudis. That's going to be the biggest gap. Is that the one that you all are doing for the keynote too?
I'm sorry, which one?
Saudis?
Yes, we'll be referencing.
Yeah.
We're gonna probably write a Taiwan app too, and we'll see.
Yeah. Those are the two big ones. They're the biggest recipients. They have the best links to the other. Probably number 3 on that list is going to be Israel. Okay? U.S. support for Israel in terms of arms. They are a major ally in the Middle East. People have gone as far as to say make Israel part of NATO in the past. It's never going to happen. You know, that's how special the U.S.-Israeli relationship is. They have, you know, we have sent them more aid, not just since 1978, but since the 1950s. Right? Our support for Israel is so unconditional that when they destroyed a U.S. intelligence ship during the what was it, the first Israeli-Arab war, right? We had a spy ship out in the Mediterranean that had picked up Israeli soldiers executing Egyptian soldiers in violation of the Geneva Conventions and all the rules of war. Just lined them up and shot them down as opposed to taking them prisoner. You know, we caught intelligence of this. You know, Israel sank that ship to try to cover it up. I said, okay. Right? We never really formally acknowledged it or did anything about it. Like behind the scenes, yeah. But that's how special it is, and we give them all of our best weapons. Right? They get all the. Israel has the best air force in the Middle East by a very large margin, because they are surrounded. You know, they are surrounded by hostile countries. Israel was created in the 1940s as a solution to no more to give the Jewish people a homeland. And so, you know, in the great minds of the British and the Americans at the time, the solution was to give them a homeland that somebody already lived on, right? In Israel, the state looks like a dagger. It has a shape of something, and so it's referred to as the dagger in the heart of the Arab world. Right? And it's not because all Arabs are anti-Semites. It is literally we created a state for a different set of people on top of Arab people. And nobody's like that. In fact, when Egypt signs the peace accord in 1978, all the other Arab countries hate on Egypt because it broke that bit of unity that was so fundamental. Now, the problem with this is, yeah, Israel's a great ally of the United States, and they do a lot of great things for us there, and they're very reliable. But in the process, they have become one of the worst settler states that there can exist. They have an underclass population of Palestinians who do not have equal rights, who are regularly targeted with U.S. weapons, who have led uprisings only to be quashed by a modern military machine. And Egypt's aggressive in them, Israel's aggressive in the Middle East. They carry out bombing strikes against Syria, Iraq, right? They bombed potential nuclear reactors there. And so a lot of people will talk about one of two things. One, there's going to be the Israel settler colonialism. And we talk about settler colonialism in a little bit. I'll give you an idea of what that looks like a little bit better. But two is going to be we need to start decreasing arms to Israel to help rein them in. That they become too aggressive, both against the Palestinians and neighboring countries. And the more that we arm them, the more nervous we make every other country in the Middle East. Because all of them fear that Israel might just preemptively strike them. And Israel has nuclear weapons. They don't officially declare them. Everybody knows they have them. And those nuclear weapons are going to be carried on American F-16s. In fact, they've loaded onto American F-16s before. American-made F-16s, like the Israeli Air Force bombs. And so the best Israel apps are going to be all about leveraging back the worst of Israel's foreign policy. Because they are surrounded by hostile states. The other problem from a military perspective that Israel suffers from is what's called strategic depth. Russia has a lot of strategic depth. They're a huge country, right? How did they help defeat the Germans in World War II? They just let Germany roll in. Come on, keep coming. Eventually the supply lines get too far, too long, too hard to maintain, and they're able to bog it down. Israel doesn't have that. It's a tiny, geographically it is tiny. It can, you know, it takes less time for a jet to fly over Israel. You know, it's 15 minutes. They have no place to back up to. And so from a military perspective, they are very offensive oriented. The second Arab-Israeli war was Israel first struck some of the neighboring countries because they knew an attack was coming and didn't want to be, and were outnumbered. And so had to preemptively strike a number of targets to take them out. Anytime you're relying on preemptive strikes, you're destabilizing, right? Other countries don't know what you're going to do. You get use it or lose it mentalities, and it's destabilizing. So a lot of the Israel apps are going to focus the non-critical ones, right? The ones that aren't about colonialism, are going to focus on how destabilizing that makes their foreign policy, and how it encourages abuses of Palestinians. Saudi Arabia we talked about. Bahrain, United Arab Emirates are the next two that are major importers of U.S. arms that a lot of people say we need to start reining in. Bahrain is home to is now home to the major American facilities in the region. We have a major naval base there that is where our Persian Gulf Fleet centers on. We have an Air Force base in Qatar that kind of falls into this category as well. The United Arab Emirates is a very wealthy country because of oil and gas and buys a lot of weapons. The problem with us arming them is that when the Arab Spring happened, 2010, 2011, Arab Spring, peaceful uprising of folks throughout the Middle East demanding democratic reforms. Starts in Tunisia, catches on fire in Libya, eventually leads to the downfall of Gaddafi with the help of NATO intervention, causes the downfall of the government in Egypt, right? Only to be replaced by some other characters that turned out to be long-term shady. Spreads to places like to Bahrain. These countries are a lot like Saudi Arabia, where they are sultanates. They have kings and dynasties, and not a democratic system whatsoever. Although they might not be democratic, the folks in a lot of these countries do have a lot of freedoms, but comparatively to the democracies of the world, not so much. They're not brutal dictatorships. The rules aren't fair. Bahrain, though, especially during the Arab Spring, as a response, they rolled out the troops on the people. In fact, Saudi Arabia sent troops into Bahrain to help the uprising because they were worried it would spread to there. And so a lot of folks have been writing over the years that our support for these countries has been undermining democratic reforms. Now, the other aspect of this is that what country is not on this list? What's a major Middle Eastern country that's not on this list?
Iran.
Yeah, Iran. We don't sell arms to Iran. We used to. We supported the Shah of Iran for a number of years until the Iranian Revolution and the American hostage scandal, and then we cut them off and we embargoed them, right, for years. They are your regional descent. They are your China of this region. The argument is that we should be arming all of these countries to the teeth to deter Iran. Israel. There's a number of people who talk about if Iran pursues nuclear weapons, Israel is going to be the one who takes them out. They will lead the airstrikes in the hopes of striking. The Saudis are our major ally in the region because of our relationship with Iran. And we want them to be able to push back against it. The same with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, all of this. It's all about the U.S. relationship with Iran and how it balances out. So that's your major regional disadvantage, is deterring Iran. And the one that we have to think about. Egypt is the outlier. Egypt's too far out of the picture to deter Iran. But again, human rights abuses being fueled by U.S. military. There are a number of authors who've talked about Like, we should start cutting these countries off because of their human rights records, because of the things that have been happening here, and all. So that's pretty much the focus of the Middle East. Is it a question about helping Israel and others deter Iran, or is there something else going on? So when you think about what's my dissat for this region, it's Iran. Africa. Africa has the potential outside of Egypt to be an important part of the topic, because when we talk about most people who die in violent conflicts die from small and light arms, most of those deaths are occurring in Africa. The number of people who have died in the civil wars in Central Africa, in what used to be called Zaire, and now is the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the neighboring states around it, has surpassed the combat battle deaths of World War II. There's been millions of people murdered in violent conflict over the years, all in these civil wars. However, the hard part for this topic is most of that is happening with small and light arms. Very little of that is happening inside of tanks or inside of anything else that we are providing along those ways. And so, although it's the place where the topic probably matters the most in terms of actual deaths that are occurring, it's very hard to have an app do anything about those because it's small and light arms. Those things are instantly replaceable. Oh no, I can't get the Chinese-made version of the gun that everybody makes. Oh no, America won't sell me these guns. I'll just buy these instead. And so that part of the topic has some potential. There is a weapons app to be written there. For the countries, though, really the things that you're going to see, there's a number of different, and these apps all are kind of the same. For Kenya, we have been giving a lot of counterterrorism assistance, right? I just decided at the end, I was like, look, we have a growing counterterrorism assistance in sub-Saharan Africa, SSA, right? Sub-Saharan is what SSA is. Sub-Saharan Africa, which is all of the countries that aren't bordering the Mediterranean on the north coast of Africa, because those are largely Arab states and are different than the rest of Africa, just because of history and culture, and there's a giant desert that separates them, right? We have been growing in our counterterrorism assistance to this country to fight the likes of Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda offshoots. There's some in West Africa that are both ISIS affiliated and Al-Qaeda affiliated. There's the Lord's Resistance Army, which I think might have finally been defeated, who was running around Uganda and places like that. They funded themselves by poaching elephants. They were illegally smuggling ivory to buy weapons. And so we've been giving more and more counterterrorism assistance to these countries, most in the grounds of counterinsurgency claims. And the argument has been the U.S. needs to scale this back. That we are empowering places like Kenya some human rights abuses in the name of counterterrorism. Morocco, I'm not sure. I have them on this list because they get a ton of American support, right? They qualify for FMF financing. They buy advanced fighter jets from us. There's an app to be written there because they also support a number of problematic counterinsurgency efforts. That the fear is the fear is blowback. Not that the terrorists are going to get hold of these weapons, but these are conflicts that don't involve the United States in any way, shape, or form. The grievance of the insurgency has nothing to do with American presence, but because we are supporting these governments, it makes us interfere. And so there are some apps about limiting the types of counterinsurgency arms that are given to these countries. Not a lot of literature out there. You'll run into this. Your common kind of negative ground on this is going to be the fill-in arguments that we'll talk about in a little bit. You don't have a really good kind of deterrence relations other than just like terrorism generally, which on the military presence topic, a lot of teams, that's what we went for countries like decreased U.S. presence in the Horn of Africa area, like Djibouti and a couple of countries there. We do it for terrorism. Your part of the topic? The best apps that exist so far that I know of that people have been actively writing, one is Ukraine. This is the Russia part of the topic more than anywhere else. We are providing weapons to former members of the Soviet Union or the Warsaw Pact, Ukraine, all the Eastern European countries, and Poland especially. And that's angering Russia and is destabilizing them. We are pouring lots of support into Ukraine because although they are in an ongoing conflict with Russia, who has occupied parts of eastern Ukraine, the Crimea, right? They have reclaimed these territories, and there's been an ongoing Russian-backed insurgency. It is very open that these are just Russian troops. But the problem is when we try to step up to defend our Ukrainian allies in Kiev, some of the support we give emboldens them a little bit more, angers Russia, prevents a peaceful settlement of the conflict. Right? Poland, same thing. And the Eastern European countries. The more support we give them, the more it's destabilizing and fearful to Russia because they think that we're encircling them. Right? We've expanded NATO to its borders, right? Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia are all former Soviet republics that are now full members of NATO. The weapons that we give them are destabilizing. Really, the thing that Russia is worried about when we talk about these former Eastern European countries is that we're going to give them missile defense designed to take out Russian missiles fired at the U.S. What the U.S. tries to sell it as is that we're giving it because there's a growing ballistic missile threat from places like the Middle East, Iran, North Africa, and a few other places that these countries just need protection from. So they want a missile defense system. And Russia's like, yeah, that's us. You are trying to take out our weapons. That's destabilizing. So that's the type of app that you're going to see in those genres. In terms of some of the NATO allies, these are going to be probably very specific weapon systems apps that are tricky. They're designed to stop. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody says don't make NATO buy the F-35. And the other good argument for why we should sell weapons to some of the NATO allies is that it undermines their own capacity to develop new weapons. So, the French, British aerospace industries, they need those contracts. They need their militaries to be buying their weapons so that the European defense forces can build themselves up and not be reliant on American systems. So make sure, those apps are all going to be tricky and small, but they're usually going to be designed around one or two very specific systems. Nobody is going to say, don't provide weapons to NATO allies at all. That's just not going to be the case. Finally, we have Latin America. This is going to be a smaller part of the topic. The kinds of things that I've seen in the literature about this is first, I have Guatemala on this list. Why? The United States has been sending a lot of aid to Central America over the years, usually in the form of counter-narcotics assistance. And I'm going to talk about those apps a little bit separately, but also part of counterinsurgency stuff. But Guatemala, I like as an example because the articles that kind of started to make the app showed why some of the most innocuous arms transfers are actually dangerous. Right? The thing that got criticized in one article is we sent jeeps, not the actual weapons, not the actual guns, but military jeeps to Guatemala. That massively enabled them to carry out a more effective counterinsurgency strategy against a number of groups. Because their forces and the state armed forces became more mobile, they had more reliable transportation, faster, and so even something as simple as a jeep becomes a major part of the topic. For Brazil, the concern here is that their newly elected leader, Bolsonaro, much like Duarte in the Philippines, a little bit too right-wing, a little bit too aggressive, has been kind of engaging in a number of policies that people are saying we need to try to rein in. And because they buy a lot of U.S. weapons, we might be able to get some leverage over them. And we do sell to Brazil. We do it for a reason. I'll give another example of that when we talk about some of this apps. But really, the big app for Latin America is going to be counter-narcotics assistance, right? The war on drugs is an abject failure. The idea that we can arm these countries to the teeth to fight the flow of cocaine, heroin and marijuana into the United States has been approved yet, right? But we continue to send more and more and more weapons to places like Colombia in order to help them crack down on cartels, fight against the violent organized crime syndicates that takes to have major distributions of drugs. But these policies fail. They make government forces too aggressive. There's a number of impacts that come out of this. There's a few, when the LD folk had this topic last year, there was a number of teams running banned counter-narcotics systems to Latin America, and then had a number of advantages based off of the kind of like disproportionate effect it produces. The other app that's out there is just small arms exports. It turns out the most violent crime that occurs in Latin America is carried out using U.S. manufactured weapons. Rifles, handguns, weapons. Most street crime in Brazil, the weapons that originate in the United States. So there is a concern in terms of that. So those are the major areas. Now, Australia, we send a lot of stuff to them. Will there be an app that somebody says don't sell Australia something? Maybe. Canada, they buy a lot of U.S. weapons. Can you read a Canada app? Maybe. Right? But because they're democracies, because they don't, it's like nobody is really worried about the aggressive Canadian foreign policy. Oh no, we're all going to be playing hockey if we continue to harm Canada. Probably not the best of apps out there. I wouldn't be. Those apps are all going to be. We're making them buy a terror, something like the F-35 that's bad for them. We shouldn't do that. So those are just most of the differences. So those are the different countries, the different regions of the world, and you can see it's like each one has its own set. The other kind of part of this is the weapon-specific apps. Probably the best two are the first two up here in terms of banned cluster bomb sales. Right? These are weapons that violate most of the standards of the laws of war. They cause horrendous atrocities. Most of the little bomblets that fall out of them don't explode. And so they sit in the ground waiting for somebody to touch them and to explode at random. It is a problem that the country of Laos has been dealing with since the 1970s because all of the bombing runs that the United States did over North Vietnam, when they reached the end of their run, if they still had ordnance on board, they dropped them in Laos. So the country of Laos is littered with hundreds of what are called UXOs, or millions of UXOs, unexploded ordnances. And they sit in the ground waiting for somebody to plow the field and lose a little. Right. Landmines is one of the great disasters of the world. We do not export landmines, so they're not on top of that. That's as close as you're going to get to that app. So there's a pretty good push to ban cluster bombs. There's a good push to ban cluster bombs to Saudi Arabia because they're actively using them. Missile defense, we've talked about. Right? There will be a number of different missile defense apps in the different regions of the world. Either missile defense to Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, or missile defense to Europe and the Middle East. All of them are concerns. All of them are places that we don't want to have. There's a good, robust missile defense debate to be had in all parts of the literature as to whether or not it's good or it's bad. So it is one that always shows up in debate. The newer one is drones. So the United States did put a lot of export controls on drone technology once we started developing it. But in the last few years, not really because of Trump uniquely, but because of the lobbying efforts by the arms manufacturers, they've been saying, look, China and Russia are quickly filling in the global demand for drones. Because once the US started using them, it was demonstrated how effective they could be, and everybody wanted them, right? Everybody wants the robot that can go do the killing for them that doesn't put their own people at risk. Well, now all these big Chinese variants are out there. The United States sees itself losing out on a major market, and we're loosening export controls on drones. A lot of people are concerned about that. They think we should ratchet it up so we have some leadership ability to have arms control over drones. But not only that, like, the easier weapons are to use because there's no risk involved to a person, the more likely they are to get used. And so we don't want drone technology to proliferate. The problem is that the market's already been filled in. Right? The US is trying to play catch up there, so solving for drones. This next category, dual use technology, things that can have capabilities for weapons of mass destruction. Right? Missile systems that might be able to carry a heavy enough payload. Aircraft, combat aircraft that can carry a nuclear payload. A number of technologies that are used can fall into this. And these are just going to be asked about proliferation. Be it missile proliferation and missile technology control regime, or kind of weapons of mass destruction. You're going to see a lot of very specific aircraft sales apps. Right? Don't sell Taiwan a very specific variant of the F-16. Is one that's already been written. Don't sell people the F-35. Don't give people bombers. Don't give them this weapon or that weapon. These aircraft sales will be out there. Don't give helicopters to certain countries because they use them to kill insurgents. Right? One of the biggest discrepancies an insurgency faces is they steal a bunch of small light arms, and they start their violent uprising. If they face a military with an air force, there's nothing they can do about it unless they're able to get a hold of anti-aircraft systems. Right. And most governments know that that's why they keep these helicopters and jets around, not because they're attacking other people, but to keep their own people down. And so there are going to be apps based on that. Some other kind of versions of it. There's a growing body of literature for riot gear, because it is the arm of the oppressors. Most of that, though, is tear gas. Right? And it's always sold anytime, if you start to research this app, you'll always see the picture that's going to occur in every internet article about it is going to be a tear gas canister that the government forces fired at protesters in some country somewhere that says right on the side, made in the USA. Kind of hard to be the beacon of human rights and freedom when you're giving the tools of oppression to the countries of the world. And so tear gas, it also kind of falls into dual use technology because maybe that's a chemical weapon. If it's a chemical, that's a weapon. So there is that sort of app. There's some training apps, right? One of the training programs, which when I did the research on this, it seems like sometimes it falls within foreign military sales and FMF financing, sometimes it doesn't. But the United States runs a program called INET, International Military Education and Training, where we get the top officers from a lot of developing, from around the world, really, friendly countries, sometimes even slightly unfriendly countries. And they come here and train, become professionalized in the ways of the American military. Over the years, INET has turned out some of the worst human rights violators in the planet. Right? The Indonesian government in the 70s basically learned how to more efficiently run their counterinsurgency programs because of the United States. And by more efficiently run them, I mean kill more of their own people and deny them human rights. The same is true for a lot of the Latin American countries. It was used to prop up a number of military dictatorships there because they came through the United States training. They went back to their home country, and all the kind of benefits that we thought that we were instilling on them gone. There's also the School of the Americas, which is down in Benton, Georgia, which has, similar to INET, has done the same thing. Foreign officers that come in, they go back to their home country, they become enlisted. Right? That's probably the best training-based app. The other training packages that people talk about is, look, when we sell advanced conventional weapons, these things are complex. You need to learn how to fly them. You need to learn how to operate the weapon systems on board. Most advanced military systems are no longer designed for the 18-year-old kid fresh out of high school. We can stick you behind, we stick you in this tank and you go. Yeah, there's all sorts of technology, all sorts of specialization that goes into it. Right? Think about like the amount of training that we have to put in for somebody to be a sonar operator on a submarine. How do you learn to listen? How do you learn to interpret these screens? How do you do all this? That training is included in a lot of weapons sales. There might be some apps that try to deny that training. That's really the smaller part. The bigger part of that is going to be the INET School of Americas. Finally, small light arms, light weapons. There is a push for a global ban There's the Arms Trade Treaty, which was the U.S.